The first scream wasn't loud. It was the kind of scream that stopped halfway through, as if whoever made it suddenly realized they weren't supposed to. I dropped the laundry basket before I even knew I was moving. "Mom." Ethan's voice echoed from downstairs. Not the basement. Lower. Somehow. Lower. My heart lurched into my throat as I raced through the hallway of the 100-year-old farmhouse my husband insisted was the perfect place to start over. We'd only lived there for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of unpacking boxes, learning which floorboards creaked, and listening to Daniel laugh every time I said the house gave me a strange feeling. "There isn't even a basement," he'd told me with a smile when we toured it. "Just a crawl space. Nothing interesting." Now my 12-year-old son was calling my name from somewhere beneath my feet. I reached the kitchen to find Ethan kneeling on the floor beside the old pantry, staring into a jagged opening where warped wooden boards had collapsed. His face was pale. His hands trembled. "Mom," he whispered without looking away. "There's a door down there." 3 weeks earlier, moving to Ash Grove, Virginia, had felt like the fresh start our family desperately needed. Or at least that's what Daniel kept saying. I wanted to believe him. After 20 years of marriage, I knew every version of my husband. The charming architect who could convince strangers to trust him within minutes. The patient father who never missed Ethan's baseball games. And the quiet man who sometimes disappeared into his own thoughts for hours without explanation. Lately, I'd been seeing more of that last version. Ever since Daniel inherited the farmhouse from an uncle he'd barely mentioned before. "Free property," he'd said when the lawyer called. "We'd be crazy not to move." Leaving Baltimore hadn't been easy. I had a teaching job I loved. Ethan had friends he'd known since kindergarten. Daniel had an architecture firm he'd built from the ground up. Yet somehow, within 2 months, everything changed. Daniel sold the company. I resigned. Our suburban home went on the market almost immediately. Whenever I questioned the speed of it all, Daniel smiled the same reassuring smile. "We need a simpler life, Claire." He always had an answer. Always. Looking back, that should have bothered me more. The farmhouse itself was beautiful in the way old photographs are beautiful. Weathered white siding, a wraparound porch, massive oak trees whose branches scraped against the upstairs windows whenever the wind picked up. The neighbors smiled politely but never stayed long enough to talk. When I asked about the previous owners, conversations somehow ended. The house has history, one elderly woman had finally said before climbing into her truck. Then she'd driven away. Daniel brushed it off. Small-town people love their rumors. Maybe, but even rumors begin somewhere. The first odd thing happened on our second night. I woke around 2 a.m. because Daniel wasn't beside me. I found him standing on the back porch wearing only pajama pants. He wasn't smoking. He'd quit years ago. He wasn't on his phone. He was simply staring toward the old barn 50 yards behind the house. His expression wasn't fear. It was recognition. Almost guilt. "Daniel?" He flinched so hard I thought he'd been caught doing something terrible. I couldn't sleep. "You've been standing here a while. Just thinking." "About what?" He smiled. "The future." It sounded rehearsed. By morning he acted as though the conversation had never happened. Why would someone lie about simply standing outside? A few days later I discovered another strange habit. Every evening at exactly 8:30, Daniel walked through the entire house, checking every window and every exterior door. Not unusual. Except he always stopped in the pantry. He'd stand there silently for several seconds before leaving. No explanation. One evening I laughed. Checking for monsters? He looked genuinely startled. What? You always pause here? I do? You've done it every night. He forced a chuckle. I guess old houses make me cautious. Then he immediately changed the subject. Why avoid such a harmless question? Ethan noticed changes too. Dad gets mad whenever I play near the pantry. I looked up from grading papers. What do you mean? He keeps telling me not to jump on that part of the floor. Maybe it's weak. But he doesn't say that. What does he say? Ethan frowned, trying to imitate his father's voice. Stay away from that spot. That's all? Exactly those words. Children notice patterns adults dismiss. I should have listened. By the second week, tiny inconsistencies began collecting in my mind. Daniel claimed he'd never visited the farmhouse before inheriting it. Yet he somehow knew which kitchen drawer held the old spare keys. He knew the upstairs bathroom faucet needed to be turned exactly halfway to stop dripping. He knew the attic ladder stuck unless you pushed left first. Whenever I asked how he knew these things, he answered casually. Lucky guess. There were too many lucky guesses. Unless they weren't guesses at all. Then came Saturday. Rain hammered against the roof while Daniel drove into town for hardware supplies. Ethan and I stayed home unpacking old boxes. He disappeared into the pantry, searching for canned soup. A minute later, came the crash, followed by silence. Then, Mom! I found him kneeling beside splintered boards that had caved beneath the weight of several forgotten shelves. Cold air drifted upward from the darkness. The opening revealed rough stone steps descending farther than any crawl space should. At the bottom stood an enormous steel door. Black, ancient, locked. A heavy chain wrapped around rusted handles. My pulse quickened. This, I whispered. This can't be right. Ethan shined his phone flashlight downward. The beam disappeared into darkness before reflecting off something metallic. There really is a basement. No. I shook my head instinctively. Your father said there wasn't. Maybe he didn't know. But even as Ethan said it, neither of us believed those words. Daniel knew this house too well. The air rising from below smelled dry, not moldy, not abandoned, as though someone had opened the door recently. Ethan crouched lower. There are footprints. What? In the dust. I grabbed his shoulder before he could climb down. Don't. But not until your father gets home. He frowned. Why? Because suddenly I wasn't sure I wanted Daniel to know we'd found it. The thought appeared so naturally that it frightened me. Why would I hide something from my own husband, unless part of me already suspected the answer? That evening Daniel pulled into the driveway. The moment he walked through the kitchen door, he stopped. Not because he saw the broken floor, because he saw our faces. What happened? The pantry collapsed, I said carefully. He didn't move. His eyes slowly shifted toward the opening. For one single second, every trace of color vanished from his face. He dropped the hardware bag. Nails scattered across the floor. What? His voice cracked. Did you see? Not are you okay? Not did anyone get hurt? Only one question. What did you see? I watched him. Really watched him. His breathing. His shaking hands. The sweat appearing across his forehead. This wasn't surprise. It wasn't confusion. It looked exactly like fear. I found a door, Ethan answered. Daniel's eyes snapped toward him. You went down there? No. You didn't touch anything? No. Daniel let out a slow breath that sounded almost like relief. Then just as quickly his expression hardened. I'm calling someone tomorrow to seal that up. I stared at him. Seal it? It's dangerous. It's part of the house. It isn't any more. His answer came too fast, too sharp, too final. That night, after Daniel fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The image of the chained steel door refused to leave my mind. Neither did Daniel's face. People can fake surprise. They can fake confidence. They can even fake love. But genuine fear? That flashes across a face before the mind has time to hide it. And my husband had looked terrified. Around midnight I heard the bedroom door open. Very quietly. I kept my breathing slow, pretending to sleep. Daniel slipped into the hallway. A moment later I heard soft footsteps crossing the kitchen. Then, the unmistakable sound of wood scraping against wood. The broken pantry floor. He was going back to the hidden basement. Alone. And whatever waited behind that locked steel door, Daniel was making sure it stayed there. The bedroom door clicked shut so softly that under normal circumstances, I never would have heard it. But I wasn't asleep. I counted to 10 before slipping out of bed. The hallway was dark except for the faint glow from the kitchen nightlight. Daniel moved carefully, almost professionally, avoiding the loose floorboards that creaked near the staircase. It wasn't the cautious walk of a man trying not to wake his family. It was the walk of someone who had done this many times before. I waited until he disappeared into the pantry before following. From the hallway, I watched him kneel beside the collapsed floor. He wasn't surprised by the opening anymore. He reached inside a toolbox hidden behind the pantry shelves and pulled out something I'd never seen before. A small brass key attached to a faded leather strap. My pulse quickened. If he truly had known about the basement, why did he already have a key? He climbed down without turning on a flashlight. Seconds later I heard the faint metallic rattle of chains. Then, silence. Not a single sound came from below. The silence itself felt unnatural. After nearly 15 minutes, Daniel climbed back up. He locked the toolbox, brushed dust from his hands, and quietly returned upstairs. His face looked calmer, almost relieved. I slipped back into bed seconds before he entered the room. When he lay beside me, his hands smelled faintly of machine oil. Not dirt, not old wood. Machine oil. The next morning, Daniel acted exactly like himself. He made pancakes. He teased Ethan about sleeping until 9. He kissed my forehead before pouring coffee. If I hadn't watched him disappear beneath the house, I would have believed nothing unusual had happened. "Mornin'," he smiled. "You sleep okay?" I studied him carefully. Perfectly. It was the first lie I'd ever knowingly told my husband. Oddly enough, he smiled as if he expected it. After breakfast, Daniel announced he had errands in town. "I'll probably be gone most of the afternoon." "What kind of errands?" I asked. "Hardware store." "You went yesterday." "I forgot a few things." His answer came instantly, too instantly. As soon as his truck disappeared down the gravel road, Ethan appeared beside me. "You followed him last night, didn't you?" I stared. "How do you know?" "I heard your bedroom door." I sighed. "I don't want you sneaking around, okay?" "I won't." He paused. "Unless you do." Despite everything, I laughed. He was still 12. Still my little boy. That innocence made what happened next even harder. The toolbox was exactly where Daniel had hidden it. Inside were ordinary tools. Hammer, tape measure, screwdrivers. Nothing unusual. Until Ethan noticed the false bottom. "Mom." He tapped the wooden panel. "It sounds hollow." Using a flathead screwdriver, we lifted the hidden compartment. Inside lay 3 objects. The brass key, an old black and white photograph, and a folded newspaper clipping. The photograph showed the farmhouse sometime in the early 1990s. Standing on the porch were 4 people, an elderly couple, a teenage girl, and a young man. I froze. The young man looked exactly like Daniel, maybe 20 years old. Same eyes, same smile, same scar above his eyebrow. Only, Daniel had sworn he'd never visited this house before inheriting it. "What year is that?" Ethan asked. I turned the picture over. Written in faded blue ink. Summer 1994. Daniel would have been 23. My stomach tightened. He hadn't just visited this house. He had posed for family photographs here. Why lie about something so easily disproved? The newspaper clipping was worse. Its headline read, "Local teen missing after family tragedy." The article described a 17-year-old girl named Rebecca Collins, who disappeared from Ashgrove without a trace. Police suspected she had run away. No evidence of foul play was ever found. One sentence caught my attention. Rebecca was last seen at the Collins family farmhouse. Our farmhouse. I looked back at the old photograph. The teenage girl smiling beside Daniel. Her face matched the grainy newspaper image perfectly. Rebecca. Missing. Never found. Ethan swallowed. "Mom. I know. Should we call someone? I don't know." And for the first time, I truly meant those words. The truck pulled into the driveway, much earlier than expected. We barely had time to return everything before Daniel walked inside. His eyes immediately moved to the toolbox. Not to us. To the toolbox. Had he noticed it was slightly out of place? His smile faded for only a heartbeat. Then it returned. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I answered. He looked directly at Ethan. "What have you been doing all day?" "Nothing." Daniel held his gaze a second longer than necessary, then nodded. That evening dinner felt painfully normal, almost forced. Daniel talked about repainting the barn. Ethan barely spoke. Every time I looked at my husband, I saw that photograph hidden beneath the toolbox. Every bite tasted like cardboard. Later that night, while Daniel showered, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Normally, I never touched it. Tonight, I did. One message appeared on the lock screen. Unknown number. Did they find it? Just 5 words. Nothing else. Before I could think, another message arrived. "You promised that room would stay sealed." I felt the blood drain from my face. Daniel entered the kitchen with a towel over his shoulder, just as I set the phone down. He noticed immediately. "You needed something?" I heard it buzz. He picked up the phone, read the notifications, deleted both messages without opening them, without saying a word. Then he smiled. "Wrong number." I stared at him. "Twice?" He shrugged. "People text the wrong person all the time." Another lie. Another perfectly practiced lie. Sleep never came. Around 1 a.m, I quietly opened my laptop. If Daniel wouldn't tell me about Rebecca Collins, maybe the internet would. Most articles repeated the same facts. Missing. No suspects. Case eventually went cold. Then I found an archived discussion from an old local history forum. One comment stood out. "Everyone thinks Rebecca ran away. They don't know what happened in that basement." My hands froze over the keyboard. Basement. The comment was deleted. The account no longer existed. But someone else had replied years earlier. "There never was a basement. Stop spreading lies." Someone answered beneath that. "Ask Daniel Mercer." I couldn't breathe. Daniel's last name. Not Collins. Mercer. Yet somehow strangers connected him to Rebecca's disappearance. I checked the date. The discussion had been posted nearly 10 years before I even met my husband. The following morning I decided to do something I never imagined possible. I drove to the county courthouse. Property records are public. If Daniel had hidden something, paperwork might not. An elderly clerk helped me locate the farmhouse's history. She frowned when she saw the address. "Oh, you know it?" She hesitated. "People still ask about this place sometimes." My heartbeat quickened. I'd like copies of every ownership record. She disappeared into the archive. When she returned, she carried a thick folder. The Collins family owned it until 1995. I nodded. "And after that?" She glanced down. "It transferred to—" Her voice trailed off. She looked confused. "That's strange." "What?" "The records between 1995 and 2002 are missing." "Missing?" She flipped through the folder again. "They should be here." "They aren't." "No." She looked genuinely puzzled. "I've worked here 32 years. I've never seen an entire chain of ownership disappear." Someone hadn't just hidden a room beneath the house. Someone had erased 7 years of its history. And somehow, my husband was connected to the exact years that no longer existed on paper. I didn't tell Daniel about the missing property records. I didn't mention the courthouse. I certainly didn't tell him about the online forum that connected his name to Rebecca Collins. Instead, I watched him. For 2 more days. And the more I watched, the less I believed the story forming in my own mind. Because guilty people usually become careless. Daniel became careful. Too careful. Every night he disappeared into the basement for exactly 15 minutes. Every morning he looked exhausted. Every afternoon he drove into town, always returning with groceries or hardware supplies he barely used. He wasn't acting like someone hiding a crime. He was acting like someone desperately trying to prevent something. The question was, prevent what? Everything changed on Thursday afternoon. A sheriff's cruiser pulled into our driveway. Daniel wasn't home. Sheriff Walter Briggs introduced himself with an apologetic smile. "Sorry to bother you, Mrs. Mercer?" "No problem. I heard about the pantry collapse." I nodded cautiously. It exposed an old basement. His expression changed instantly. "You've been down there?" "No." "Good." He glanced toward the house before lowering his voice. "If I were you," he hesitated, "I'd leave that room alone." "Why?" "I can't answer that." "Because of Rebecca Collins." The sheriff froze. For several long seconds neither of us spoke. Finally he sighed. "So, you've started asking questions?" "Someone should have years ago." His face filled with regret. "Sometimes the truth hurts innocent people more than guilty ones." Then he climbed back into his cruiser and drove away. He never answered a single question. But his warning wasn't directed at Daniel. It was directed at me. That night, I decided I was done waiting. When Daniel disappeared downstairs after midnight, I followed him. This time I climbed into the hidden basement. The stone steps were colder than I expected. At the bottom, I finally saw the steel door up close. The chains were gone. Daniel had unlocked them. The heavy door stood slightly open. Warm light spilled through the narrow gap. I stepped closer. Then I heard voices. One belonged to Daniel. The other, a woman, alive. I pushed the door open. The room beyond looked nothing like a prison. It looked like a workshop. Old furniture, medical supplies, generators humming quietly, shelves filled with canned food. Sitting beside a small fireplace was a woman in her late 40s. Gray streaks ran through her dark hair. The moment she saw me, tears filled her eyes. Daniel slowly turned around. Neither of them looked surprised, only sad. I knew this day would come. he whispered. For nearly an hour nobody spoke. Finally the woman broke the silence. My name is Rebecca Collins. Every theory I'd built collapsed. But I struggled to breathe. They said you disappeared. I did. They searched for you. I know. I looked toward Daniel. You knew she was alive? He nodded. For 32 years. The story was nothing like I imagined. Rebecca hadn't been murdered. She hadn't been kidnapped. She had escaped. At 17, she discovered her father had been abusing several foster children placed in their home. When she threatened to go to the police, he promised no one would believe her. Back then. He was right. Daniel had been Rebecca's college-aged cousin. He spent summers at the farmhouse. One night Rebecca confessed everything. Together they gathered evidence, financial records, photographs, journals. Before they could go to authorities, Rebecca's father learned the truth. He came after her with a rifle. Daniel helped her escape through the hidden basement, a room originally built as a Cold War storm shelter. Rebecca disappeared intentionally. She started over under a different identity hundreds of miles away. Weeks later, her father died of a heart attack before ever standing trial. Without Rebecca's testimony, the remaining evidence disappeared. The town assumed she'd run away. Daniel was the only person who knew the truth. Why hide her all these years? I asked. Rebecca answered. Because every few years someone came looking. Who? My father's former business partners. They were involved. They're all dead now, Daniel added quietly. I waited until the last one passed away. So why keep visiting? Daniel looked toward Rebecca. She was diagnosed with early Parkinson's last year. The medical supplies suddenly made sense. I promised I'd never abandon her. You could have told me. His eyes filled with tears. I wanted to. Every day. But it wasn't only my secret. Rebecca nodded. If anyone recognized me, the entire story would become public. And the foster children, I whispered. They built new lives. They deserved privacy. The photograph. The messages. The missing property records. One by one, every mystery found an explanation. The unknown texts had come from Rebecca's doctor, checking whether the room had remained secure after the pantry collapsed. The missing ownership records? Daniel quietly purchased the farmhouse years earlier through legal intermediaries to ensure Rebecca always had a safe place to live without anyone connecting the property to her. The courthouse records hadn't been erased. They'd been sealed under witness protection-related court orders, after a judge determined they contained information identifying vulnerable victims. Even the sheriff knew. He hadn't been protecting a criminal. He'd been protecting survivors. Then Ethan appeared in the doorway. He had followed me. His eyes widened. So, he looked between Rebecca and Daniel. Nobody's dead? Rebecca laughed through tears. No. Ethan let out the biggest sigh I'd ever heard. I thought Dad was secretly a serial killer. For the first time in days, everyone laughed. Even Daniel. Months later, Rebecca finally chose to tell her story publicly. Not for revenge. Not for sympathy. For the foster children who had spent decades believing nobody believed them. 3 more survivors came forward. Their statements finally completed the investigation history the town never understood. Ashgrove stopped whispering about a missing girl. Instead, it remembered a brave young woman who had survived. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the old barn, I asked Daniel the question that had haunted me from the beginning. Why did you tell me the house didn't have a basement? He smiled sadly. Because I wanted this place to become our home. He looked toward the hidden door beneath the pantry. Not a prison built from old memories. I reached for his hand. For a while, I almost believed the worst about you. I know. Were you angry? He shook his head. No. I was afraid. Of what? That after enough lies, even the truth would sound impossible. He was right. It almost had. The deepest secrets are not always kept to hide guilt. Sometimes they are carried for decades to protect people whose lives have already been shattered. Trust is not the absence of secrets. It is the courage to face the truth together when those secrets finally come to light. If you had discovered the locked basement before learning the truth, would you have trusted your spouse enough to ask for an explanation? Or would you have assumed the worst? Share your thoughts in the comments below.